Jessica Harlow stared at the letter in her trembling hands, the weight of its proposition heavier than the dusty trunk she dragged all the way from Boston to this godforsaken corner of Wyoming Territory. 1876 had started with her father's funeral and her discovery of his mountain of gambling debts, and now, 6 months later, she found herself considering the unthinkable marriage to a complete stranger. "Miss Harlow." The station master's voice broke through her thoughts. "The coach to Eagle Creek leaves in 10 minutes. You boarding or not?" Jessica folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her reticule. "Yes, I'm boarding." The journey to Eagle Creek was punishing. For 3 days, the stagecoach bounced and rattled over terrain that grew increasingly wild. Jessica clutched her small valise to her chest, her other possessions abandoned to creditors back east. The only thing of value she still owned was her mother's wedding ring, which hung on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her high-necked traveling dress. Her fellow passengers, a salesman, an elderly couple, and a young man who couldn't stop coughing, barely spoke to her. Perhaps they sensed her desperation, or perhaps they were simply uninterested in another Eastern woman come west to find her fortune or a husband. In Jessica's case, it was both. The letter had arrived 2 months ago, just as the last of her father's estate was being sold off to satisfy his debts. Her cousin Margaret had written from Wyoming Territory with an unusual proposal. Margaret's neighbor, a rancher named Quinn Foster, was seeking a bride. He had land, cattle, and a recently built house. What he lacked was a wife. Margaret had mentioned Jessica, and Mr. Foster had agreed to the arrangement, sight unseen. "He's offering to pay your passage west," Margaret had written, "and will provide you with a respectable home. He asks only that you be honest, hardworking, and willing to help build a life here. If you find the arrangement unsuitable upon meeting him, he will pay for your return journey east." It had seemed like Providence. With no prospects, no money, and creditors hounding her daily, Jessica had accepted immediately. The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside a weathered building with Eagle Creek Station painted in fading letters across its facade. Jessica was the last to disembark, her legs wobbly from the journey. The air was different here, thinner, drier, scented with sage and dust. "Jessica?" "Jessica Harlow." A woman in her 40s hurried toward her, sunbonnet flapping. Jessica recognized her cousin Margaret, though they hadn't seen each other since they were girls. "Margaret." "Thank goodness." The older woman embraced her warmly. "Look at you, all skin and bones. Was the journey terrible?" "Never mind, don't answer that." "Of course it was. Come along. We'll get you settled at my place for the night. Quinn will come by tomorrow." Margaret's place turned out to be a modest cabin on the outskirts of town. Her husband Thomas, a blacksmith with enormous hands and a gentle demeanor, greeted Jessica with awkward courtesy before returning to his forge. "He's not much for conversation," Margaret explained as she showed Jessica to a small bedroom. "But he's a good man, like Quinn." "Tell me about Mr. Foster," Jessica said, carefully unpinning her hat. "Your letters were rather vague." Margaret busied herself with turning down the bed. "Quinn's a good man. Came out here 6 years ago with nothing but determination. Now he's got one of the more promising spreads in the territory. Built himself a proper house last year, not just a cabin." "But what is he like?" Margaret paused. "He's reserved. Lost his parents young, worked cattle drives for years before settling here. Doesn't waste words. But he's fair and honest, and I've never known him to break his word once given." "How old is he?" 32, I believe." "Not too old," Jessica thought with relief. "Is he?" She hesitated, unsure how to phrase her question delicately. "Handsome?" Margaret smiled. "I suppose that depends on what you find handsome. He's tall, strong-built from years of ranch work. Has a serious face, but not unpleasant. Light eyes that see more than he lets on." It wasn't much to go on, but Jessica hadn't come west for romance. She'd come for survival. "Why hasn't he married before now?" she asked. Margaret's expression grew somber. "There was a girl years ago. She died of fever before they could wed. Quinn doesn't speak of it, but Thomas says he took it hard. Threw himself into building his ranch after that." Jessica nodded, feeling a strange kinship with this man she'd never met. They'd both known loss. "You should rest," Margaret said, moving toward the door. "Tomorrow will be a big day." Sleep eluded Jessica that night. She lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Wyoming night coyotes in the distance, the wind whistling through gaps in the cabin walls, the occasional creak of the wooden structure settling. What would Quinn Foster be like? Would he be disappointed when he saw her? Would she be repulsed by him? Dawn was breaking when she finally drifted off, only to be awakened 2 hours later by Margaret's gentle knock. "Jessica? Quinn will be here by noon. I've heated water for you to wash." The morning passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Jessica washed and changed into her best dress, a navy blue cotton with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. She arranged her dark blonde hair in a simple but neat style, pinning it at the nape of her neck. There was no mirror in the small bedroom, so she had to trust she looked presentable. At precisely noon, the sound of hoofbeats announced a visitor. Jessica's heart leaped into her throat. From the bedroom window, she caught a glimpse of a tall man dismounting from a chestnut horse. His movements were fluid and confident, his broad shoulders outlined against the bright sky. She couldn't see his face, just the brim of his hat as he tied his horse to the hitching post. "Jessica?" Margaret called. "He's here." Taking a deep breath, Jessica smoothed her skirts and stepped into the main room of the cabin. The door opened, and Quinn Foster ducked his head to enter. Jessica's first impression was of height and strength. He stood well over 6 feet, his frame lean but powerful. Sun-weathered skin stretched over high cheekbones, and a strong jaw darkened with stubble. His eyes, pale blue beneath straight brows, fixed on her with intensity. "Miss Harlow," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands.
"I'm Quinn Foster."
His voice was deep but quiet, with a hint of roughness, as if he didn't use it often. "Mr. Foster," Jessica replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "It's a pleasure to meet you." He nodded once, his gaze moving over her in a quick assessment that wasn't quite rude but certainly direct. "I'll leave you two to talk," Margaret said, heading for the door. "Thomas needs my help at the forge." The moment the door closed behind her cousin, an awkward silence descended. Quinn Foster stood with his hat in his hands, not fidgeting but completely still in a way Jessica found unnerving. "Please sit down," she offered, gesturing to the table. He complied, setting his hat on the table and folding his large hands in front of him. Up close, Jessica could see the lines at the corners of his eyes and the small scar that bisected his left eyebrow. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his face's steadiness that suggested reliability. "Your journey was acceptable?" he asked. "It was. Long," Jessica admitted, "but not unbearable." He nodded. "Wyoming's not for everyone, especially women from the East." "I'm aware of the challenges," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "I wouldn't have come if I wasn't prepared to face them." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps approval, perhaps skepticism. "Margaret says you were honest about your situation in your letters," he said. "I appreciate that. I've been honest too. I have land, cattle, and a house that needs a woman's touch. I can provide for a wife and any children that come along. What I can't provide is romantic nonsense." Jessica felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not looking for romance, Mr. Foster. I'm looking for security and a chance to build a new life." "Good," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "Why me? I beg your pardon? Why agree to marry a stranger? Why not someone you actually know?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "I don't know anyone who's offering marriage," she said carefully. "That doesn't answer my question." Jessica looked down at her hands, then back up at him, deciding that honesty was the only approach that would work with this man. "My father died in January. He left nothing but debts. I've spent 6 months watching everything I've ever known be sold piece by piece. The alternatives to your offer were limited and unappealing." Quinn studied her face. "What alternatives?" "My father's creditors suggested arrangements. Or I could have sought employment as a governess or companion, though without references, those positions are difficult to secure. I considered factory work. And marriage to an unknown rancher in Wyoming seemed better than those options." "Yes," Jessica said simply. "It did." He nodded slowly. "I respect your honesty, Miss Harlow. Now I'll be honest with you. I need a wife, not just for the cooking and cleaning, though that's part of it. I need someone to help make my house a home, to maybe give me children someday. I'm not looking for love, but I am looking for a partner. Someone I can respect and who might come to respect me." "That seems reasonable," Jessica said, finding his straightforwardness oddly refreshing after the veiled language and false courtesies of Boston society. "There's more," Quinn continued. "Wyoming's hard country. Winters are brutal. Neighbors are few and far between. The work never ends. And I'm not an easy man to live with. I keep to myself. Don't talk much. Some would say I'm hard." "Are you cruel?" Jessica asked directly.
He looked startled by the question. "No."
"Never raised a hand to a woman in anger. Never will." "Are you a drunkard?" "I drink occasionally. Never to excess." "A gambler?" His mouth twitched slightly, almost a smile. "No, Miss Harlow. I don't gamble with cards or dice. Just with cattle and weather, like every rancher." Jessica nodded, satisfied. "Then I believe I can adjust to your other qualities." Quinn studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I promised you could return east if you found me unsuitable. This is passage money. Take it now, keep it somewhere safe. If at any point you decide this life isn't for you, it's yours to use." Jessica stared at the pouch, touched by the gesture. It suggested a fairness she hadn't expected. "Thank you, but I won't be needing it." "Take it anyway," he insisted, pushing it across the table. "Peace of mind for both of us." She accepted the pouch, feeling the weight of coins inside. When would you like to be married?" "Tomorrow, if that suits you. The circuit preacher's in town this week. Won't be back for another month otherwise." "Tomorrow," Jessica repeated, her heart racing. "Yes, that would be fine." Quinn stood, reaching for his hat. "I'll come for you at 10. We'll marry, then head to the ranch. It's a 2-hour ride." "I'll be ready." He nodded, settled his hat on his head, and moved toward the door. There, he paused and turned back to her. "One more thing, Miss Harlow. I meant what I said about not offering romance. But I do offer respect and fidelity. You'll have both from me, always." With that, he was gone, leaving Jessica to wonder what exactly she had agreed to. The wedding took place the next morning in Eagle Creek's small church. Jessica wore her navy dress again, with a borrowed white shawl from Margaret. Quinn appeared in clean dark trousers and a white shirt, his usual work clothes replaced for the occasion. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, revealing a stronger jawline than Jessica had noticed before. The ceremony was brief, attended only by Margaret and Thomas and a handful of curious townspeople. The preacher, a wizened man with kind eyes, spoke the familiar words, and Quinn's steady, "I do," was matched by Jessica's slightly tremulous one. When instructed to kiss his bride, Quinn bent down and pressed his lips briefly to hers, a dry, chaste kiss that lasted barely a second, but left Jessica oddly breathless. "Mrs. Foster," he said quietly afterward, the first time he'd used her new name. "Mr. Foster," she replied, uncertain what else to say to the stranger, who is now her husband. After a brief meal at the town's small restaurant, Quinn's wedding gift, he explained they prepared to depart for the ranch. Jessica's valise was secured behind Quinn's saddle, and then came the moment she'd been dreading. "You'll ride with me," Quinn said, standing beside his horse. "Side saddle won't work for the terrain we're crossing." Jessica stared at the tall horse with apprehension. She'd ridden before, but always properly, always side saddle. The idea of riding astride, especially in a dress, especially with this man she barely knew. "I can't," she began. "You can," Quinn said firmly. "I'll help you." Before she could protest further, his hands were at her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Jessica found herself settled in the saddle, her skirts arranged as modestly as possible given the circumstances. Quinn swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his chest warm against her back, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "Hold onto the pommel," he instructed, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "Lean back against me if you need to." The 2-hour ride to the Foster Ranch was the most physically intimate experience of Jessica's life. Every bump in the trail pressed her closer to Quinn's solid frame. His arms remained on either side of her, steadying her when necessary. They barely spoke, but Jessica became acutely aware of the rhythm of his breathing, the subtle shifts of his body as he guided the horse, the faint scent of soap and leather that clung to him. The land they traversed was unlike anything she'd seen before, vast open spaces stretching to distant mountains, rolling hills covered in sagebrush, and occasional stands of cottonwood trees marking watercourses. It was beautiful in a stark, uncompromising way that both thrilled and intimidated her. "There," Quinn said eventually, pointing ahead. "That's our place." Jessica's first sight of her new home took her breath away. A 2-story house of hewn logs stood proudly on a gentle rise, with a creek winding behind it and mountains framing the view. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, what looked like a bunkhouse, and various sheds and corrals. In the distance, cattle grazed on lush grass. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Quinn's arms tightened slightly around her, perhaps in surprise at her approval. "Built the house myself. Took 2 years." As they drew closer, Jessica could see the careful craftsmanship of the house, the perfectly fitted logs, the generous windows, the wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was solid and well-built, suggesting prosperity and permanence. A young man emerged from the barn as they approached, waving in greeting. "That's Pete," Quinn explained. "Works for me. Lives in the bunkhouse with Hank, who's probably out with the herd." Quinn dismounted first, then reached up to help Jessica down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, as if ensuring she was steady on her feet. "Pete," he called, "come meet Mrs. Foster." The young man, barely 20, Jessica guessed, hurried over, removing his hat to reveal a shock of red hair. "Madam," he said, bobbing his head respectfully. "It's a pleasure. Boss told us you were coming." "Thank you, Pete," Jessica replied, oddly touched by his enthusiastic welcome. "Get her valise, would you?" Quinn requested. "I'll show Mrs. Foster the house." Pete hastened to comply, retrieving Jessica's small bag and carrying it ahead of them to the house. Quinn placed his hand lightly at the small of Jessica's back, guiding her up the path to the porch. "It's not fancy," he warned as they reached the door, "but it's solid and weather-tight." "It's more than I expected," Jessica assured him. The interior of the house confirmed Quinn's talent for construction. The main floor consisted of a large room that served as both kitchen and living area, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy table with 6 chairs stood near the kitchen area, while 2 comfortable-looking armchairs faced the fireplace. The floors were smooth planks, the walls the same hewn logs as the exterior, chinked with what looked like clay and straw. Simple curtains hung at the windows. Kitchen's fully equipped, Quinn said, gesturing to the cast iron stove and various cupboards. Pantries through there, stocked with provisions. Pump at the sink brings water from the well. Jessica nodded, mentally cataloging everything. The kitchen was better equipped than she'd anticipated, with good quality cookware hanging from hooks and plenty of storage space. Upstairs are 3 bedrooms, Quinn continued, leading her to a staircase. Ours is the largest. The others are empty for now. The implication of future children hung in the air between them as they climbed the stairs. The upper floor was as well constructed as the lower, with a central hallway opening to 3 rooms. Quinn pushed open the first door, revealing a spacious bedroom with a large bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. A handmade quilt in blues and greens covered the bed, and curtains of similar fabric framed the window. Margaret helped with the furnishings, Quinn explained, seeming almost embarrassed. Said a woman would want certain touches. It's lovely, Jessica said, genuinely impressed. The room was simple but comfortable, with thoughtful details she wouldn't have expected from a bachelor rancher. Pete appeared in the doorway with her valise. Where would you like this, madam? Just set it down there. Thank you, Jessica instructed, pointing to a spot near the chest of drawers. Supper's at 6, Quinn told her when Pete had gone. I'll let you get settled. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. He turned to leave, then paused. Jessica, he said, the first time he'd used her given name. I know this isn't what you're used to. If there's anything you need, just ask. The simple kindness in his words touched her. Thank you, Quinn. I will. Left alone, Jessica sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. 24 hours ago, she'd been unmarried and unsure of her future. Now she was Mrs. Quinn Foster, mistress of a Wyoming ranch, married to a man she barely knew. She looked around the room that would now be hers, theirs taking in details she'd missed at first glance. A small bookshelf held a dozen or so volumes. A rocking chair sat in the corner near the window, positioned to catch the best light for reading or sewing. On the wall hung a small framed sketch of the mountains visible from the window. Moving to the chest of drawers, Jessica began unpacking her meager possessions: 2 changes of clothing, a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small wooden box containing her few pieces of jewelry, including her mother's cameo brooch. It took less than 10 minutes to put everything away, her belongings occupying just 1 drawer of the large chest. The rest of the afternoon passed in exploration. Jessica investigated the pantry and kitchen, familiarizing herself with the supplies and equipment available. She examined the other bedrooms upstairs, both empty save for bed frames and basic furniture, waiting for occupants. Everywhere she went, she found evidence of Quinn's craftsmanship: perfectly fitted joints in the furniture, smooth planed surfaces, careful attention to detail. At precisely 6 o'clock, Quinn returned to the house, washing up at the pump outside before entering. Jessica had spent the last hour preparing a simple meal from the provisions she'd found: salt pork fried with potatoes, fresh bread that Margaret had sent along, and stewed apples for dessert. Smells good, Quinn commented as he hung his hat on a peg by the door. I hope it's satisfactory, Jessica replied, suddenly nervous. I didn't have time to bake fresh bread, but I'll start some tomorrow. No need to apologize, he said, taking a seat at the table. Anything hot and filling is welcome after a day's work. They ate in relative silence, the clink of cutlery against plates the primary sound in the room. Quinn ate efficiently, without rushing but without lingering either. Jessica found herself watching his hands, large, calloused from work, but surprisingly dexterous as they handled knife and fork. Was everything to your satisfaction? He asked when they'd finished. The house, I mean. Yes, very much so, Jessica assured him. It's a beautiful home, Quinn. You should be proud of what you've built here. A hint of color touched his cheekbones. Thank you. Been working toward it for a long time. As Jessica cleared the dishes, Quinn remained at the table, seemingly wrestling with something he wanted to say. Finally, as she was wiping down the table, he spoke. "About tonight," he began, his voice gruff. "I know this isn't conventional. We barely know each other." Jessica froze, her heart suddenly pounding. Of course, the wedding night. How could she have not prepared herself for this conversation? "I won't claim my rights as a husband," Quinn continued, looking at the table rather than at her. "Not yet. Not until you're ready. You'll have the bed. I'll take one of the other rooms for now." Relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment flooded through Jessica. "That's very considerate of you." Quinn nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "I meant what I said yesterday. I offer respect. Rushing you wouldn't be respectful." "Thank you," Jessica said softly. He rose from the table. "I need to check on some things in the barn. I'll be back later." After he left, Jessica finished cleaning up from dinner, her thoughts in turmoil. She'd been prepared to do her duty as a wife, steeling herself for an awkward, possibly uncomfortable night. Quinn's consideration both relieved and confused her. Did he find her unattractive? Was he regretting their arrangement already? By the time she'd readied herself for bed, washing up and changing into her nightgown, Quinn had not returned. Jessica climbed into the large bed alone, surrounded by the scent of clean linens and the faint aroma of pine from the wooden frame. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she listened for Quinn's return. She must have dozed off eventually, because the sound of the front door opening startled her awake. Heavy footsteps moved quietly through the house, followed by the creak of floorboards in one of the other bedrooms. Quinn had kept his word. Jessica lay awake for a long time after that, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, wondering what the coming days would bring. The next few weeks established a routine. Jessica rose early to prepare breakfast for Quinn and the ranch hands. Quinn would leave after eating, spending most of the day working with the cattle or tending to ranch business. Jessica occupied herself with housekeeping, cooking, and learning about her new environment. To her surprise, she found satisfaction in her new role. The work was hard but straightforward, and the results of her efforts were immediately visible: a clean house, good meals, order brought to what had clearly been a bachelor household. Quinn expressed his appreciation in his quiet way, complimenting her cooking or nodding approval when he noticed a new curtain or a freshly scrubbed floor. They continued to sleep separately, though Quinn now took his meals with her regularly and sometimes sat with her in the evenings, reading by the fire while she sewed or knitted. Conversation between them remained limited, but gradually became more comfortable. Jessica learned to interpret Quinn's various silences: thoughtful, content, troubled, and discovered that when he did speak, his words were worth hearing. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Quinn returned from town with a package for her. "Ordered these from the mercantile," he said, setting the brown paper parcel on the table. "Thought you might want them." Jessica unwrapped the package to find several yards of pretty calico fabric, a new set of knitting needles, and 3 books novels by authors she enjoyed. "Quinn," she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gifts. "This is wonderful. Thank you." He shrugged, but she could tell he was pleased by her reaction. "Noticed you finished the books on the shelf, and thought you might want some new fabric for whatever women use fabric for." Jessica laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised them both. "Curtains, dresses, quilts, all sorts of things. This is beautiful calico. I can make new cushion covers for the chairs." That evening marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Quinn began asking her opinion on ranch matters: which cattle to sell, whether to expand the vegetable garden, if they should host the neighboring ranchers for the upcoming harvest celebration. Jessica found herself increasingly involved in the operation of the ranch, not just the house. For his part, Quinn started sharing more of himself with her. One night, as they sat by the fire, he told her about his childhood in Missouri, his parents' death from cholera when he was 16, his years working cattle drives before saving enough to stake his claim in Wyoming. "Been on my own a long time," he concluded. "Got used to it." "It must be strange, having someone else in your space now," Jessica ventured. Quinn looked at her directly, the firelight reflecting in his pale eyes. "Not strange," he said quietly. "Just different. Better, mostly." The compliment, simple as it was, warmed Jessica more than the fire. The following Sunday, they attended church in Eagle Creek together for the first time since their wedding. Jessica wore a new dress she'd made from the calico Quinn had given her, and she noticed with satisfaction how his eyes widened slightly when he saw her. After the service, several of the local women approached Jessica, introducing themselves and offering welcomes that seemed genuine. "We're having a quilting circle on Tuesday," one woman told her, "at the Peterson place. You should join us." "I'd like that," Jessica replied, surprised and pleased by the invitation. As they rode home together, Jessica seated in front of Quinn, as had become their custom, she felt a growing contentment. She was building a life here, making connections, creating a home. It wasn't what she'd imagined for herself, but it was good nonetheless. "The Petersons invited us to dinner next Saturday," Quinn said as they rode. "Would you like to go?" "Yes, I would," Jessica replied. "Mrs. Peterson invited me to her quilting circle as well." Quinn nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. People respect the Petersons. Their friendship is valuable." "Do you have many friends here?" Jessica asked, realizing she knew little about Quinn's social connections. "Few close ones. More acquaintances. Ranchers tend to keep to themselves, but we help each other when needed. Like when you helped the Dawsons rebuild after the fire last year." Jessica had heard the story from Margaret. Quinn's arms tightened slightly around her in surprise.
"Yes. How did you know about that?"
"Margaret told me. She said you organized the neighboring ranchers to help rebuild their barn and house, and that you contributed most of the lumber." "They would have done the same for me," Quinn said dismissively. "Perhaps. But it was still generous." He was silent for a moment. "This country is hard. People don't survive long without helping each other." As summer turned to fall, the pace of ranch work intensified. Cattle needed to be counted, sorted, and prepared for winter. Hay had to be cut and stored. Buildings required maintenance before the harsh Wyoming winter set in. Quinn worked from dawn until well after dusk, often coming home so tired he barely managed to eat before falling asleep in his chair by the fire. Despite their separate sleeping arrangements, Jessica found herself growing increasingly aware of Quinn physically. She noticed things she hadn't before: the way his shoulders strained against his shirt when he chopped wood, the grace with which he handled his horse, the rare but transformative effect of his smile. Sometimes she caught him watching her too, his eyes quickly averted when she noticed. One crisp October evening, Jessica was kneading bread dough when Quinn entered the kitchen, back early from checking fence lines. "Storm's coming," he announced, removing his coat. "Big one, by the look of the clouds. Might snow tonight." Jessica glanced out the window at the darkening sky. "Is everything prepared?" "As much as can be. Cattle are in the lower pastures, closest to the barn. Pete and Hank will keep watch through the night." Quinn moved to the sink to wash his hands, standing close enough that Jessica could feel the heat radiating from his body. When he turned, water dripping from his freshly washed face, their eyes met and held. Something electric passed between them, acknowledgement of the attraction that had been building for weeks. The moment was broken by a thunderous boom that shook the house. Jessica jumped, dropping the ball of dough back into the bowl. "Just thunder," Quinn said, though he looked concerned. "But closer than I'd like." Within the hour, the storm hit with full force. Rain lashed against the windows, driven by howling wind. Lightning flashed continuously, followed by crashes of thunder that made the dishes rattle in their cupboards. Quinn paced the house, checking windows and doors, adding wood to the fire, his face tight with worry. Is it always this bad? Jessica asked as a particularly violent gust rattled the house. No, Quinn admitted. This is worse than usual, especially for fall. A sudden pounding at the door startled them both. Quinn opened it to reveal Pete, soaked to the skin and wide-eyed with panic. Lightning struck the north pasture fence, he gasped. Cattle are scattering. Hank's trying to round them up, but we need help. Quinn was already reaching for his coat. I'll be right there. He turned to Jessica. Stay inside. Keep the fire going. We might be bringing in wet, cold men later. Be careful, Jessica urged, suddenly afraid. Quinn paused, looking at her intently. Then, in a swift, unexpected movement, he bent and pressed his lips to hers, a real kiss this time, brief but firm. I will, he promised, and was gone into the storm. The hours that followed were the longest of Jessica's life. She kept the fire blazing, prepared coffee and soup, set out towels and blankets, and still had nothing to do but wait and worry. The storm showed no signs of abating, its fury seeming to increase as the night wore on. Finally, well past midnight, the door burst open. Quinn staggered in, supporting Pete, whose face was streaked with blood from a cut on his forehead. Hank followed, limping badly. Jessica, Quinn called, his voice hoarse. Need your help. Jessica sprang into action, helping the injured men to chairs by the fire. Pete's wound was superficial. A branch had struck him during the roundup, but Hank's ankle was badly sprained or possibly broken. Cattle? She asked Quinn as she cleaned Pete's cut. Most accounted for. Lost a few, but not as many as I feared. Quinn himself seemed uninjured, but he was exhausted, his face gray with fatigue. When the other men had been tended to, fed, and settled Pete on a pallet by the fire, Hank in one of the spare bedrooms upstairs, Jessica turned her attention to her husband. You need to get dry and warm, she told him firmly. I've heated water for a bath. Too tired to argue, Quinn allowed her to lead him upstairs to their bedroom, where she had positioned the tin bathtub before the small fireplace and filled it with steaming water. He hesitated at the door. I can manage, he said. You can barely stand, Jessica countered. Let me help you. The intimate act of helping Quinn undress and bathe crossed a boundary they had carefully maintained for months. Jessica kept her eyes averted as much as possible, but she couldn't help noticing the breadth of his shoulders, the lean strength of his body, the scars that marked his skin, testament to years of hard work and occasional violence. Quinn submitted to her ministrations in silence, his exhaustion overcoming any embarrassment. When he was clean and dry, Jessica helped him into a nightshirt and guided him to their bed, which he had never shared. You need rest, she said, pulling the covers over him. The men are taken care of. Everything else can wait until morning. Jessica, Quinn murmured, already half asleep. Thank you. She hesitated, then made her decision. Moving to the other side of the bed, she slipped beneath the covers, maintaining a respectful distance, but present nonetheless. Quinn's breathing soon deepened into sleep, but Jessica lay awake, listening to the storm gradually diminish and the steady rhythm of her husband's breathing beside her. When she woke the next morning, Quinn was gone, the impression of his body still visible in the mattress beside her. Jessica found him downstairs, checking on Pete, who was awake but groggy. Hank's still sleeping, Quinn reported. Ankles swollen badly. We'll need to get the doctor out here if it doesn't improve by tomorrow. How are you feeling? Jessica asked. Quinn met her eyes, something new in his gaze, warmth, gratitude, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. Better, he said simply. Thank you for last night. You would have done the same for me, she replied, echoing his words from their earlier conversation about the Dawsons. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes, I would have. That night, Quinn came to their bedroom without comment or explanation. He took his place beside Jessica in the bed, maintaining the same respectful distance as before. Neither spoke of the change, but both recognized its significance. In the weeks that followed, their physical relationship developed slowly. Quinn began with small gestures, a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing hers as he passed her something at the table, a brief touch to her hair as he passed her chair. Jessica responded in kind, growing bolder in her own demonstrations of affection. The first time Quinn truly kissed her, a deep, seeking kiss that left them both breathless, was after returning from a 3-day cattle drive to the railroad. Jessica had been watching for him anxiously, worried about his safety on the trail. When he appeared, dusty and tired but unharmed, she had run to meet him, propriety forgotten. He'd swung down from his horse and swept her into his arms, his kiss leaving no doubt about his feelings. That night, they became husband and wife in every sense. Quinn was gentle and considerate, his hands surprisingly tender for a man accustomed to hard physical labor. Jessica discovered aspects of herself she'd never known existed: passion, desire, a capacity for pleasure that both surprised and delighted her. Afterward, lying in Quinn's arms, Jessica marveled at the unexpected turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she'd been desperate and alone, agreeing to marry a stranger out of necessity. Now she found herself falling in love with that stranger, building a life she hadn't dared imagine. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, his voice rumbling beneath her ear, where her head rested on his chest. "I'm thinking about why I came here," Jessica admitted. "How I agreed to marry you, without knowing anything about you. How desperate I must have been." Quinn's arms tightened around her. "Do you regret it?" Jessica raised herself on one elbow to look into his face. "No," she said truthfully. "I don't regret it at all. I used to wonder," he confessed, "why you would agree to marry someone you'd never met. Why not wait for someone you knew, someone from your world?" "I had no other options," Jessica said. "At least, that's what I thought then. But now I wonder if it wasn't something else too, a desire for adventure, perhaps. A chance to build something new." Quinn traced the line of her cheek with one calloused finger. "And have you found what you were looking for?" "I've found more," Jessica told him softly. "I've found a home, a purpose, and someone I care for deeply." Quinn's eyes darkened. "Jessica," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I never expected to feel this way again. After Eleanor died, I thought that part of me was gone for good." "Eleanor was the woman you were to marry before?" He nodded. "We grew up together in Missouri. Planned to marry once I had enough saved for our own place. Then the fever took her, and I had nothing to stay for. Came west to outrun the memories." "I'm sorry," Jessica said, meaning it. "She must have been special." "She was," Quinn agreed. "But that was another life. You're my life now, Jessica. You and this ranch and whatever future we build together." The declaration, coming from a man who rarely expressed his feelings, moved Jessica deeply. "I love you, Quinn," she said, the words emerging naturally, without calculation or doubt. His eyes widened in surprise, then softened with an emotion that matched her own. "I love you too," he said simply. "Never thought I'd say those words again, but there they are. True as anything I've ever said." Winter descended on the Foster Ranch with typical Wyoming ferocity: howling blizzards, temperatures that froze water solid in seconds, snow that drifted higher than the fence posts. But inside the sturdy log house, warmth prevailed. Quinn and Jessica settled into a rhythm of married life that suited them both, working together during the day and finding comfort in each other's arms at night. Christmas brought their first real celebration as a couple. Jessica decorated the house with pine boughs and berries, baked special treats, and even managed to find small gifts for Quinn and the ranch hands. Quinn surprised her with a beautiful rocking chair he'd been secretly crafting in the barn, and a delicate gold locket containing a tiny photograph of the two of them, taken in town the previous month. "For our children to see their parents young," he explained as she admired the locket. Jessica looked up at him, her heart full. Children? You're thinking of children already? Quinn's ears reddened slightly. Been thinking of them since before you came. Wanted a family. A real one. Never thought I'd find someone like you to build it with, though. As if his words had been prophetic, Jessica discovered in February that she was expecting their first child. Quinn's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for: joy, concern for her well-being, and a fierce protectiveness that manifested in his insistence that she rest more and let him take on additional household tasks. "I'm pregnant, not ill," she protested one evening when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry upstairs. "Humor me," he said, taking the basket from her hands. "Never had a wife or child before. Don't know exactly how this works." "We'll learn together," Jessica assured him, touched by his concern. Spring brought new life to the ranch calves in the pastures, green shoots in the garden Jessica had expanded, and the quickening of the child within her. Quinn's business prospered as well. The previous fall's cattle sale had been exceptionally profitable, allowing him to purchase additional grazing land and hire another hand to help with the increased workload. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Quinn took Jessica's hand in his. "Been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Remember that money I gave you when we first met? For passage back east if you wanted to leave." Jessica nodded, surprised by the reference. The pouch of coins had been tucked away in her drawer for months, forgotten until this moment. "What would you think about using it differently?" Quinn continued. "To bring your friend from Boston out for a visit after the baby comes? The one you write to Elizabeth?" Jessica stared at him in astonishment. "You would do that?" Quinn shrugged, trying to appear casual, though she could see the importance of her reaction in his eyes. "Thought you might like to have a friend here. Someone who knew you before. And I'd like to meet the people who matter to you." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes. Hormone-induced emotional reactions had become common in recent months. "Quinn Foster, just when I think I couldn't possibly love you more, you prove me wrong." He smiled, the full, genuine smile that had become less rare over the months of their marriage. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Jessica agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "I'd love for Elizabeth to visit. She won't believe how my life has changed." "For the better, I hope," Quinn said, a hint of his old uncertainty in his voice. Jessica placed his hand on her rounded belly, where their child had just delivered a particularly energetic kick. "Feel that? That's our future, Quinn. Of course it's for the better." The baby arrived in late August, a healthy boy with Quinn's pale eyes and a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Thomas James Foster, after Quinn's father and Jessica's, a bridge between their separate pasts and shared future. "He's perfect," Quinn whispered, holding his son with a mixture of awe and terror. "Look what we made, Jessica." "He is perfect," Jessica agreed, exhausted but radiantly happy. "And he's just the beginning." Life settled into a new pattern with little Thomas at its center. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, as steady and reliable in parenthood as he was in everything else. Jessica watched with love as the reserved rancher who had once claimed to have no talent for romantic nonsense sang lullabies to his son and spent hours simply holding the baby, marveling at tiny fingers and toes. Elizabeth arrived from Boston in October, full of curiosity about Jessica's new life and initially skeptical of the rough Wyoming Territory. But by the end of her 3-week stay, she had developed a grudging admiration for the community and a genuine liking for Quinn. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes," she told Jessica the night before her departure. "You belong here, Jess. You've found your place." "I know," Jessica agreed, looking out the window to where Quinn was chopping wood in the yard, the setting sun gilding his profile. "It's nothing like I planned, but it's everything I need." Winter came again, harsher than the previous year but finding the Foster household better prepared. The house was warm and well-stocked, the cattle secured in protected pastures, the family bound by love and shared purpose. On Christmas Eve, with Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle and a blizzard howling outside, Quinn and Jessica sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Do you ever wonder," Quinn asked quietly, "what would have happened if you hadn't answered Margaret's letter? If you'd found another way to stay in Boston?" Jessica considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I look at you and Thomas, at our home, at everything we've built together, and I can't imagine any other life. This is where I belong." Quinn kissed the top of her head. "I asked you once why you would agree to marry a stranger. Remember?" "I remember," Jessica said. "I told you I had no other options. And now, if you had every option in the world—" Jessica turned in his arms to face him, taking in the beloved features that had once been those of a stranger, the pale eyes that now crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strong jaw that Thomas had inherited, the mouth that could be firm in determination or soft with tenderness. "I would choose you," she said simply. "Every time, I would choose you." Quinn gathered her close, his kiss a promise and a benediction. Outside, the Wyoming winter raged, but within the walls of the home they had built together, love prevailed, unexpected, hard-won, and enduring. 5 years later, the Foster Ranch had nearly doubled in size. 3 children now filled the house with noise and laughter. Thomas, nearly 5 and already showing his father's aptitude for ranching. 3-year-old Margaret, named for the cousin who had brought Quinn and Jessica together, and baby William, just 6 months old, and the image of his mother. Jessica stood on the porch, watching Quinn teach Thomas how to guide a gentle old mare around the corral. Her husband had gray at his temples now, lines of experience etched more deeply around his eyes, but he moved with the same fluid strength that had first caught her attention years ago. So much had changed since that day at the stagecoach station when Jessica had arrived with nothing but a small valise and desperate hope. The frightened young woman who had agreed to marry a stranger could never have imagined the life that awaited her, the deep love she would find, the family she would build, the strength she would discover within herself. As if sensing her thoughts, Quinn looked up from the corral and caught her eye, raising his hand in greeting. Jessica waved back, her heart full. Their story had begun with a marriage of convenience, an arrangement born of necessity and practical considerations. But it had become something neither of them had dared hope for: a true partnership, a genuine love, a home in every sense of the word. In the end, Jessica reflected, perhaps it hadn't been so strange to marry someone she didn't know. After all, everyone was a stranger until you gave them the chance not to be. And sometimes, the greatest adventures and the greatest loves began with the courage to take that chance.